The Grand Meridian Hotel in Charleston, South Carolina smelled of roses and champagne, the kind of expensive flowers that wilted in 3 days, just like promises. I was 22 years old, and I'd been sold like a Hermes bag at a society auction. The diamond necklace felt cold against my skin that October evening in 2019. Not metaphorical cold. Literal, clinical cold, the kind that made me shiver beneath the silk of my navy gown. My stepmother, Caroline, had chosen it herself. She chose everything about me now, how I stood, how I smiled, which side of my face showed to the cameras. "Smile, Harper," she whispered, her nails digging into my back. The pain was deliberate. "Do you have any idea how much you're worth tonight?" I did. $4 million. Exactly. The ballroom was a glittering graveyard of old money and older men. Men who'd inherited corporations. Men who'd buried 3 wives each. Men who looked at me the way collectors look at paintings, not for beauty, but for acquisition. One of those men was seated at my left. His name was Malcolm Ashford III, and he was 67 years old. "You look radiant tonight, Harper," he said, his voice thick as syrup. He lifted a trembling hand, age spots like continents, and brushed my collarbone where the necklace dipped. His wedding ring, not yet removed from his previous marriage, caught the light. Just radiant. My father sat at the head table, tie loosened, martini in hand. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second. In that second, I saw everything: guilt, cowardice, and the practiced art of not seeing what he didn't want to see. Then he looked away. Caroline rose from her seat, champagne flute in hand. The room quieted. She had that effect, a room would shrink around her until nothing else existed but her performance. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, her smile the smile of a woman who'd perfected the art of cruelty wrapped in kindness. "To new beginnings. To family. And to a union that will benefit everyone at this table." The applause was thunderous. "Harper," Caroline said, extending her hand to me like I was a prize poodle. "Come here, darling." I stood. My legs moved. My body obeyed. "This is Harper Lynn Whitmore," Caroline announced, her arm sliding around my waist, possessive, territorial. "My stepdaughter. My daughter, really, since her own mother passed when she was just 7. I've raised her since then. And now, Malcolm has agreed to take her under his wing. To care for her. To ensure she never wants for anything." The words were crafted perfectly. Taken under his wing. Cared for. Not sold. Never that word. But the room knew. Everyone in that ballroom understood the transaction. Malcolm stood and raised his glass. "To my beautiful fiancé," he said, and the room erupted. I didn't cry. I'd learned years ago that crying gave Caroline ammunition. Crying meant I was dramatic. Crying meant I was ungrateful. Crying meant I made her the villain, and Caroline despised being cast as anything but the hero of her own story. "Thank you," I heard myself say. The words came from someone else's mouth. "You'll understand soon enough," Caroline whispered, squeezing my waist so hard I couldn't breathe. "You owe me everything." My stepmother had raised me since my mother's funeral. I was 7 years old, standing over a casket that was far too small, when my father knelt beside me and whispered, "We'll be okay. I promise." He was wrong. 3 years later, he married Caroline Mitchell, a woman with copper hair, a trust fund, and no biological children. He said it was a love match. I'd later understand it was a business arrangement disguised as romance. Caroline needed respectability. My father needed someone to manage the household and his crumbling finances. I was the collateral damage in their agreement. Caroline was brilliant at the optics of motherhood. In public, she was a vision in tailored dresses and pearls, her hand resting gently on my shoulder as she spoke to my teachers about my emotional fragility following my mother's death. Journalists covering my father's construction company photographed us together at charity galas, and the caption would read, "Self-made businessman Thomas Whitmore with his loving family." Behind closed doors, the mask slipped. I'll never forget the afternoon when I was 11. I'd come home from school with an A on a calculus test. I was proud, math didn't come easily to me. I showed Caroline because showing someone had been my mother's tradition. "Celebrate the victories," she used to say. Caroline looked at the paper for exactly 3 seconds. "An A," she said. "That's average." Penelope would have gotten an A+. Penelope was Caroline's biological daughter, 5 years my senior. She had copper hair like Caroline and a laugh that made everyone in a room turn toward her like flowers toward sun. Caroline had adopted her from my father's previous marriage without ever saying the words adoption. Penelope was simply always there, always favored, always enough in ways I never quite was. "I studied really hard," I said, my voice small. Caroline reached out and touched my face, her fingers cold, manicured nails leaving pale crescents on my cheek. "You should be grateful someone even feeds you," she said softly. "After your mother's indiscretions." That's what she called it. Indiscretions. Not cancer. Not illness. Not the fact that my mother had died at 34, gasping for breath in a hospital bed while Caroline visited exactly once and stayed for 6 minutes. When I flinched away, Caroline laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Harper. You're so sensitive. Just like your mother. So dramatic." She dropped her hand. "Your father and I were just discussing how you fabricate things for attention. We worry about you." She turned to leave, then glanced back. "Don't tell anyone about our little talk, yes? People might misunderstand. And you wouldn't want people thinking I'm unkind to you. That would make you the villain, wouldn't it?" By the time I was 16, I'd learned the language of manipulation so fluently it became my native tongue. I learned that speaking up meant I was ungrateful. Crying meant I was emotional. Asking for help meant I was weak. Staying silent meant I was complicit in my own erasure. I became a ghost in my father's house. I'd slip through hallways, eat meals in the kitchen, spend hours in the attic room that had become my refuge. Penelope floated through the same spaces like she owned them, which, in Caroline's eyes, she did. When I turned 18, I asked my father about going to college. He said we couldn't afford it right now, that the business was struggling, that maybe later. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. I was 18 years old and I understood, I was not an investment. I was an expense. October 14, 2019. The night before my 22nd birthday. I was in my attic room, reading by lamplight, when Caroline appeared in the doorway like something that had slithered up from the basement. "Come downstairs," she said. "We're having a guest for dinner." "Who?" "No questions." "Wear something pretty." "And Harper?" She paused at the door. "Don't speak unless you're spoken to. You know how you can be, so awkward at these things." 2 hours later, I stood in a borrowed dress, Penelope's dress, actually, taken from her closet without asking, as Malcolm Ashford lifted his wineglass. He'd been to the house before. He was my father's business partner. They'd made money together in real estate development, stripping old neighborhoods of their character and replacing them with expensive nothing. "To Harper," Malcolm said, his eyes moving over me like I was a property being surveyed. "To her future." My father drank. Penelope, visiting from her apartment in Raleigh, looked confused. "What's happening?" she whispered to me. I had no idea. Caroline's hand found mine under the table. Her nails dug into my skin so hard I felt blood bead. "Say thank you, dear," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled. "You'll understand soon enough." The next morning, she placed a manila envelope on my bed. Her handwriting was on the front, slanted and sharp. Harper. Read this. Sign it. My hands shook as I opened it. The letterhead was from a law firm in downtown Charleston, Whitmore and Associates Financial Services. I read the first page 3 times before the words made sense. Sponsorship agreement. This agreement, entered into this 14th day of October, 2019, between Malcolm Ashford III, hereinafter sponsor, and Harper Lynn Whitmore, hereinafter recipient, confirms the mutual understanding that the sponsor shall provide financial support, housing, and security to the recipient in exchange for companionship, social engagement, and personal attendance for a period of no less than 2 years, renewable upon mutual agreement. The sponsor shall pay a one-time sum of $4 million to the household of Thomas James Whitmore to cover all outstanding debts, business obligations, and future financial security of said household. The recipient agrees to the following conditions. Residence in the sponsor's primary residence, address below, attendance at all social functions deemed appropriate by the sponsor, availability for personal companionship as defined by the sponsor, discretion regarding the nature of this arrangement. I couldn't read anymore. I found Caroline in the morning room, drinking coffee from bone china. What is this? My voice didn't sound like my own. A sponsorship agreement, she said without looking up. We've discussed this. We have not discussed this. You will live in comfort. You will save this family. You owe me that much. This is... I couldn't say the word. But I knew what it was. I knew what it meant. You're selling me. Caroline's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. When she smiled, it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. Don't be vulgar, she said, her voice slicing like glass. That word is so pedestrian. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Malcolm gets companionship. Your father gets financial security. You get to finally be useful instead of sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. I'm not signing this. Yes, you are. No. I'm not. I'm leaving. I'll go to the police. Caroline set down her cup with deliberate care. She stood. She walked to me. And then she did something I'll never forget, she laughed. Not an angry laugh. Not a frustrated laugh. A laugh of genuine amusement, as if I'd just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. Oh, Harper, she said, touching my face like she used to when I was small. Sweetheart. Do you think anyone would believe you? Do you think your father would testify against me? He can't survive without me, financially or emotionally. He's been living on my money for 3 years. That's not true. It is true. Check the bank records. The house is in my name. His car? Mine. His business? Bankrupt. I've been carrying him like a dead weight, and do you know why? I shook my head. Because someone has to. Because your father is weak. Because Penelope has her own life now. And because, Harper, you are the only bargaining chip we have left. She tilted my chin up. So you will sign this. You will marry Malcolm. You will be the dutiful wife he's paying for. And you will never, ever tell anyone the truth. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure you regret it. I'll tell the police you're unstable. I have 3 years of journal entries where I documented your emotional breakdowns and fabricated stories. I have recordings of you making threats. I have a therapist, very expensive, very credible, who will confirm that you've always had difficulty with reality. And your father? She paused. I'll destroy him. I'll take everything. He'll have nothing. No house. No business. No money. No dignity. And it will be your fault. She released my chin. You have until tomorrow to sign, she said. The wedding is scheduled for October 28th at the country club. The guest list has already been sent. Penelope is your bridesmaid. Your father will walk you down the aisle. And everyone will believe it's the most romantic thing they've ever seen. I signed because I had no choice. Or rather, I had choices, all of them terrible, all of them ending in disaster. And sometimes, when you're cornered, you stop fighting the walls and start looking for a way out. Malcolm's mansion was on Folly Beach, a sprawling Victorian estate overlooking the Atlantic. 14 bedrooms. 6 bathrooms. A library with first editions. A wine cellar that cost more than most people's houses. It was a beautiful prison. My heels clicked against marble floors. Every sound echoed like an accusation. Malcolm showed me to my suite, a room decorated in cream and gold, with a 4-poster bed and French doors opening onto a balcony. There was a lock on the inside of the bedroom door. I noticed because he pointed it out. "So you have your privacy when you need it," he said, his hand on the small of my back. "I'm not an animal, Harper. Despite what your stepmother may have implied." The irony wasn't lost on me. He knew. Of course he knew. The entire arrangement was predicated on the knowledge that I had been sold. "Malcolm," I said. "I need to understand what this is. What you expect from me." He smiled, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Exactly what we agreed to. Companionship. Attendance at social functions. You're intelligent, beautiful, and quiet. You'll make an excellent wife." Wife. Not companion? Same thing, Harper. In my circle, wives are companions. Nothing more, nothing less. He was 70 years old. I was 22. There was an obscene mathematics to it all. But here's what I learned in those first few weeks: Malcolm Ashford was not a villain. He was something worse, he was ordinary. He was a man who'd never been told no, who'd purchased everything he'd ever wanted, and who saw me the same way he saw his Monet painting or his vintage Mercedes. As an object. As an acquisition. He was never violent. He was never cruel. He simply didn't see me. I'd eat breakfast in the morning room and watch him read the newspaper without registering that I existed. I'd stand beside him at charity galas and watch women fawn over him while he looked through me like I was glass. I'd lie in my locked bedroom at night and listen to the ocean and understand what it meant to be thoroughly, completely invisible. The staff pitied me. I saw it in their eyes: the maid who changed my sheets, the cook who prepared my meals, the driver who took me to the city. They knew what I was. And they were kind in the way people are kind to dying animals, gentle, distant, unable to help. Weeks passed. Then months. By January 2020, I'd catalogued every exit in the house. I'd learned the combination to Malcolm's office safe. I'd befriended the groundskeeper, who mentioned that Malcolm kept a second office in downtown Charleston with certain, sensitive files. I was planning an escape that I knew would fail. But then something unexpected happened. It was March 2020, exactly 5 months after the wedding. The world was beginning to shut down. COVID-19 was spreading. Malcolm had spent the week ranting about governments and overreach. He'd refused to get tested even when he developed a cough. "It's just allergies," he insisted. "I don't get sick." On March 18th, I woke at dawn because I always did. Woke, lay still, waited for the house to wake around me. But the house stayed quiet. I found him in his bed, still and pale, his hand clutching the sheets. His skin was cool. His eyes were open but not seeing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up the phone and called 911, and I reported it in a voice so steady I didn't recognize it as my own. The paramedics came. They were professional and efficient and said the words I'd been secretly hoping for: myocardial infarction. Massive. He likely passed sometime between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. Very quick. He probably didn't suffer. I wore black to his funeral. I cried when I was supposed to cry. I accepted condolences from people I'd never met. And when it was over, I waited. The lawyer, a man named James Morrison, who'd handled all of Malcolm's affairs, called me exactly 3 days later. "Ms. Whitmore," he said over the phone. "I need to schedule a meeting with you. There are matters we need to discuss regarding Mr. Ashford's will." James Morrison's office was on the 42nd floor of a high-rise in downtown Charleston. The view was of the harbor, all blue water and sailboats, all freedom and distance. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone used to delivering bad news. "Malcolm left you a letter," he said, sliding an envelope across his mahogany desk. "He asked that I give it to you only if something happened to him." My hands shook as I opened it. "Harper, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I've left you my mansion, my accounts, and this letter because I owed you that much. I knew what your stepmother did. I knew this wasn't real. I've always known. When Caroline first approached me about this arrangement, I should have turned her away. But I was 70 years old and lonely, and she offered me something I couldn't refuse, companionship that looked like love. And you were the price. I've had to live with that. Over the past 5 months, I've watched you. I've seen your intelligence, your grace under impossible circumstances. I've seen you grieve the life you should have had. And I've recognized myself in you, the person I might have been if I'd been braver. So I'm giving you what I should have given you on our wedding day, your freedom. Everything in my secondary account is yours. There are documents there. Files. Contracts. Letters from your stepmother to me, promises of repayment, instructions, proof of what she did. She was so certain I'd never speak, so certain of her control over everyone around her. She was right about everyone except me. And I was wrong to let her be right. I'm sorry, Harper. I'm sorry for the 5 months. I'm sorry for my complicity. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to fix it while I was alive. But I can give you this, justice. The account number is below. The password is your mother's maiden name and your birthday. You'll know it. You'll understand why I chose those things. Be brave. Be free. Malcolm. Tears fell onto the letter, blurring the ink. James slid a folder across the desk. "There's more," he said quietly. "When I was organizing his affairs, I found these in his safe deposit box. He left specific instructions that you should see them. Inside the folder were contracts. Dozens of them. All bearing my stepmother's signature. I read through pages of financial documents, forged loan agreements, shell companies, offshore accounts. I read emails where Caroline discussed me with Malcolm using language I'd only heard in human trafficking documentaries. The girl is compliant and beautiful. She'll be no trouble. Once she's settled, we can begin discussions about a possible renewal with your associates." There were wire transfer confirmations showing the $4 million moving from Malcolm's accounts into my father's business, then rapidly redistributed through Caroline's network of shell charities. There were transfers into a trust fund labeled simply, Penelope Future. Penelope didn't know. She couldn't have known. But she'd benefited from my sale anyway. "There's one more thing," James said, pulling a small envelope from the folder. "Malcolm wanted you to have this. He said it's the most important part." Inside was a USB drive. "What is it?" I asked. "Malcolm made a recording," James said. "About 5 weeks ago. He thought you should hear it. He said you should know that at least one person in your life was willing to tell the truth." I didn't go home immediately. I rented a hotel room in downtown Charleston and spent 3 days listening to Malcolm's recording. His voice was thin, labored at times, like he was fighting for breath even then. "I'm not a good man," he said in the recording. "I want to be clear about that. I participated in your sale. I'm culpable. But I'm also giving you this testimony, this evidence, because your stepmother is a predator, and she's counting on the silence of people she's manipulated. I'm breaking that silence." He detailed everything. Every conversation with Caroline. Every implication. Every moment he suspected she was lying and chose not to care because her lie was more comfortable than the truth. "You deserved better," he said. "You still do." By the time I listened to it the final time, I'd made a decision. I didn't go home. I went to a lawyer, a different lawyer, one James Morrison recommended, a woman named Patricia Chin who specialized in fraud cases. "This is compelling," Patricia said after reviewing everything. "The contracts alone are enough. The emails are damaging. The recording is crucial. But I need to ask you something, Harper. Are you prepared for what happens next? Once we go public with this, your entire family implodes." "My father and sister are victims too," I said. "My father's being blackmailed. Penelope doesn't even know." "That may be true. But that won't stop your stepmother from claiming you're a liar. That won't stop her from weaponizing your mental health history against you. That won't stop the media from tearing your life apart." I thought about Malcolm's letter. "Be brave. Be free." "I'm prepared," I said. It took 3 weeks to plan. I called my father on a Tuesday evening. "Harper?" His voice was uncertain. He hadn't heard from me since Malcolm's funeral. "Darling, where are you? Caroline's been asking." "I'm coming home," I said. "I need to talk to you. To both of you. About the marriage. About everything." There was a pause. "That's not a good idea. Caroline's been, well, she's been difficult." "I'm coming home," I repeated. "This Saturday. At 6 p.m. I need you both there." I didn't give him time to argue. That Saturday, I stood in the foyer of my childhood home, the home Caroline had systematically stripped of all joy. My father was there, looking smaller somehow. My sister was there, confused and concerned. And Caroline was there, radiant in a cream silk blouse, her smile the smile of a woman certain of her invincibility. "Harper," she cried, pulling me into a hug that was all performance. "Oh, my darling, how I've missed you. Come, tell me everything. How was Malcolm? The funeral must have been exhausting." "I need to talk to all of you," I said, stepping back from her embrace. "There's something you need to know." Caroline's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in her eyes. "Of course, dear. Shall we sit?" We moved to the living room. The same room where she'd told me I owed her everything. The same room where I'd learned the language of complicity. "I have something to show you," I said. I pulled up my phone and pressed play on a video file. On the screen, Caroline appeared, younger, wearing the dress she'd worn to that dinner 5 months ago. "Why are you so interested in contracts with Ashford?" my voice asked from off-screen. I'd recorded her, carefully, over many weeks. This was the moment she'd finally admitted everything. "Because Malcolm is useful," she said on screen. "And you're a bargaining chip, Harper. You always have been. From the moment your mother died and your father became pathetically dependent on me." My father made a sound like something breaking inside him. "What about the forgeries?" I asked. "Child, I've been forging your father's signature for 3 years. These documents? Beautiful. The ones I created for Malcolm's account? Even better. I could have been a lawyer." My sister's hand covered her mouth. "And the trust fund?" I asked. Penelope needs security. God knows none of you will provide it. If Harper wasn't stupid enough to question things, I could have sold her again. But she always was too sensitive. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. That's not real, Caroline said, but her voice was hollow now. That's fabricated. You're lying, Harper. You always lie. You always try to make me the villain. I have the original files, I said calmly. I have Malcolm's testimony. I have the contracts. I have the offshore accounts. And I'm going to the police. Tonight. Caroline's face changed. The mask slipped completely, and for the first time, I saw her as she truly was, not a monster, not a supervillain, but a small, terrified woman whose world was collapsing. You'll destroy this family, she hissed. No, I said. You destroyed this family. I'm just telling the truth about it. The arrest happened exactly as I'd planned. I'd called Patricia Chin beforehand. The evidence was compiled. The police arrived at 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening, and they led Caroline away in handcuffs while her mask finally, completely shattered. She screamed. She cried. She called me every name she could think of: ungrateful, vengeful, a murderer of her reputation. My father watched from the hallway, his entire universe collapsing. Penelope cried, not for Caroline, but for the mother she'd thought she had, the version who loved her, who'd given her everything. That mother had never existed. The charges were filed within days: human trafficking, fraud, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy. The media exploded. Charleston socialite arrested in daughter trafficking scheme. For $1 million bride, the woman sold by her stepmother. Exclusive, inside the life of Harper Whitmore. My phone rang constantly. Producers from true crime TV shows. Magazine editors. A publisher who offered 6 figures for my story. I turned them all down. What I did do was sit with my father in his living room, a room that no longer felt hostile because the poison had been extracted from it, and tell him the truth. I didn't know, he said, tears streaming down his face. Harper, I swear I didn't know what she was doing. I believe you, I said. And I did. Your mother. He started, then stopped. She would have protected you from all of this. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't brave enough to protect you myself. I took his hand. You're here now. That's enough. The trial lasted 3 months. I testified for 2 days. I described the dinner, the contract, the mansion, the isolation. I played the recordings. I presented the documents. And I watched Caroline sit in the defendant's chair, her copper hair turning gray by the day, her perfect posture finally breaking. Her defense was that she was protecting the family. That she was saving our financial situation. That I was an ungrateful stepdaughter with a history of emotional instability. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison. She'd be eligible for parole in 8, but that was a future I tried not to think about. In the aftermath, my father did something unexpected. He admitted to his own complicity, not to the courts, but to himself. He sold the family home, paid back all the money Caroline had taken, and rebuilt his business with integrity as its foundation. He'll never be wealthy like he was before. He'll never be successful in the way Caroline had engineered. But he's whole now. He's honest. Penelope was a trickier situation. She'd benefited from my sale without knowing it. She'd received a trust fund paid for with my suffering. For months after the verdict, we didn't speak. Then one day she called me. I transferred it back, she said without preamble. All of it. To charity. To organizations that help trafficking victims. I just I needed you to know that I did that. That I knew what it meant. We never became close again. The damage between us was too deep, too tied to childhood rivalries that had been weaponized against me. But we became something else, two sisters who'd been sacrificed to the same monster, who could acknowledge each other's pain without trying to fix it. A year after Caroline's conviction, I stood in front of a mirror I'd purchased, not hers, never hers, and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because I'd changed. Because finally, I could see myself. I'd bought a small house near the coast in Beaufort, a few hours north of Charleston. It had a studio with northern light and creaky hardwood floors. I'd filled it with plants that grew without me having to ask permission. I'd enrolled in art classes. I'd started painting, not great art, but honest art. Honest representations of the things I'd felt while silent. I'd also started volunteering at a non-profit that helped trafficking victims. I didn't talk about my story much. But sometimes, when a young woman would come in with that same blank expression I recognized from the mirror, I'd sit with her and say the things no one had said to me: none of this was your fault. You are not broken. You are not ungrateful for hating what happened to you. And you will survive this. And she would look at me with something like hope, and I would know that what Caroline had tried to destroy had instead become something that could help others. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter. No return address. The postmark was from the federal prison in North Carolina. Inside, a single sentence written in Caroline's handwriting. You ruined me. I held the letter over my kitchen sink and watched it burn. I tore the ashes in half and carried them to the beach. I stood at the edge of the Atlantic, the same ocean that had looked at me from Malcolm's bedroom, the same ocean that had held all my silent screams. I let the ashes go. The wind took them, not toward me, but away. Out to sea. Out to everywhere and nowhere. The diamond necklace sits in a safe deposit box at the bank. I don't wear it. I've thought about selling it, it's worth a fortune. But instead, I've kept it as a reminder. Not of the sale, but of the moment I understood I had a choice, to stay silent and comfortable, or to speak and be free. I chose the latter. They say the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. What I learned is that the true price is speaking the truth even when, especially when, speaking costs everything. Malcolm left me millions. I donated most of it to organizations fighting trafficking and abuse. I live modestly on the rest, teaching art to children and teenagers, many of whom have seen the kind of darkness I saw. My father comes to visit every month. We walk along the beach and talk about my mother, about his weakness, about all the things we should have said to each other earlier. He's dated occasionally, a woman named Margaret who saw him at a charity event and didn't know his history, which is exactly what he needed. Penelope is engaged now, to a good man who looks at her like she's a miracle. She'll be happy. She deserves to be happy. And me? I'm happy in a way I didn't know existed. I'm happy in the way that comes from looking in a mirror and recognizing yourself. I'm happy in the way that comes from walking away from a beach without looking back. I'm happy in the way that comes from silence breaking into truth, and truth breaking into light. My stepmother tried to sell my soul. I bought it back with courage. And that's the only debt I'll ever pay. I was sold for $4 million. I was told my silence was gratitude. I was taught that speaking up made me ungrateful, dramatic, broken. But I've learned something that changed everything. My worth was never their decision to make. Not Caroline's. Not Malcolm's. Not my father's. The moment I stopped waiting for permission to exist, I stopped disappearing. My survival became my rebellion. If you've been gaslit into invisibility, if someone convinced you that your boundaries make you difficult, that your pain makes you dramatic, that your survival makes you selfish, I need you to hear this: you are not broken. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your refusal to accept cruelty doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. It makes you brave. It makes you extraordinary. I'm here because I finally stopped apologizing for my own existence. This is where the revolution starts. Not with perfect victims or quiet suffering. With women who decide their own ending. Subscribe for more stories about turning humiliation into triumph, rebuilding after betrayal, and remembering that your worth was never in question, it was only ever waiting to be reclaimed. Hit that notification bell. Let's remind each other, we are worth fighting for. Especially by ourselves. If you or someone you know is experiencing human trafficking or abuse, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888 or text HELP to 233733.